Welcome to the Monstrous Flesh podcast, where we explore the evolution and role of women in horror, as well as familiar tropes of the genre through a feminist lens. There will be spoilers in this episode, so if you haven't seen the film yet and don't want us to ruin it for you, pause this podcast and come back when you're ready for a deep dive into it. Hi, I'm Clelia, one of your podcast hosts.
Hi, I'm Meg, the second host of the podcast.
In this series, we are turning our attention to the representation of female monster in horror cinema, and in each episode we dissect one film we feel fits the bill particularly well. And today, our film is Hatching. Meg, would you like to give us a little intro for that film?
Oh yes, okay. So, Hatching from 2022 is a psychological body horror from Danish director Hanne Bergholm. It centres on Tinja, a young gymnast who is desperately trying to please her mother, who runs a mommy blog presenting her perfect family life. And one day, Tinja finds a mysterious egg and takes it home, nurturing it in the belly of one of her teddy bears. Eventually, the egg hatches, and from its speckled shell emerges a grotesquely human-bird hybrid creature that she names Ali. Tinja keeps Ali hidden, but soon learns that feeding your young can be a bloodthirsty, dangerous business.
Oh, that was good. I immediately want to go and rewatch it just from that that intro. Love it. So I'm really glad you picked this, Meg, because I think it's one of these films that could have so easily passed me by. I think, because of the sheer nature of theatrical releases these days, there's some gems like this that just completely go under the radar for audiences. And that would have probably be one of them for me. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
What about you? So how did you come across that film actually?
I saw it. I think someone did a review of it for Ghouls Mag. I can't remember who. Again, unreliable narrator. But I'm sure you can find it on Ghouls' website. And I saw the still of her with the giant egg. And I thought, this looks incredible. Whatever is happening here, I want to see. And then I saw that it were on BFI Player, actually, and we were like looking around for something to watch, and I was like, Hatching's on here, I want to watch it. And I was really glad that I did, because I mean, it ticks a lot of my boxes. So, it's a sort of foreign language film, which I really like. I like to see different perspectives, but it's got that sort of fairy tale element, and these like complex relationships between mothers and daughters, and all that sort of sticky stuff that I think is so rife for like horror exploration. So yeah, I was really glad that we got to do it.
Yeah, no, that was a really good shout, and I think your message to me said, I'm really into my doppelganger horrors at the moment. So if you want to watch this one, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So really, really, really good shout. I loved it, and it's actually made me. In terms of recommendations, it made me think of loads of films. So we'll talk about that a bit later.
Yeah.
I'm going. If that's okay with you, I wanted to start by giving a little bit of context around the production of the film. Because so before we delve into the themes, because the story of this film is the director is really, really cool, I think. So, as you mentioned, it's coming all the way from Finland, and this is a horror-infused fairy tale directed by Finnish director Hanne Bergholm, and it's written by Ilja Rotsi. So originally, the story was about a boy that hatches a doppelganger out of an egg, but Hanne wanted to change the lead character to a prepubescent girl, as she missed seeing stories of women on screen. So already from the get-go, I'm like, yeah, love that. And I heard in an interview that she felt it had to be a horror film because it reflects the most monstrous relationship out of them all, and that of a daughter with her mother, and specifically about a mother who loves her daughter very much conditionally. And to her, that's a true horror story.
Amen.
Which made me think, well, Hannah, let me introduce you to my mom. Sorry, I'm being that mean because my mom will not listen to this, so that's fine. So, and I absolutely loved it, and I can see where she's coming from with this. But so obviously we're gonna talk a bit more about this. But Hatching at its core is an allegory about growing up, bad parenting, social media obsession, and I said we'll be deep diving into all this in a bit. But many critics lots of pieces that I read about the film, they've praised the film for its use of symbolism worthy of a dark fairy tale, and I think that's largely due to the fact that the director's work is very much influenced by the look and feel of fairy tales. I don't know what you think of this. Although Hatching is her first feature, in 2018, Hannah Bergholm wrote, produced and directed the short film Puppet Master, which is about a lonely woman who allows a man to transform her into a puppet. The film is a fantasy drama that combines actors and puppets in a poetic story about longing for love, living in an objectifying relationship, and clinging to another person. So all the themes that we love to discuss on this podcast. I don't know if you've seen. If you've seen the film. It's not super easy to find online, but obviously this is quite a public forum, so I won't tell you how I managed to see it. But I'll say, like, if you can get your hands on it, then it's very much worth a watch, and especially because it gives a bit of context to the aesthetics of Hatching, the film we're talking about tonight, and particularly to that of the bird creature. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts on that bird creature, Megan.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I mean, it's so interesting. And obviously, I mean, such a talent for this to be a first feature and it to be so wonderful and so well done.
Yeah.
You know, but that short sounds really good as well. It sounds really interesting.
Absolutely. And I was quite surprised, actually, looking into her history, that this was her first feature film because although, I mean, Hatching is, I loved it, but I can see that, you know, like in the criticisms that I read about the film, then some people find it, you know, maybe not as accomplished as it could be, but considering it is a first feature, I think it's mind-blowing, right? And the aesthetics of the film is just fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a podcast, so people can't see my look of utter disgust, so I will verbalise it instead, but like...
Yeah, your face instantly went like, ugh.
Yeah, I feel like, what does that even mean? It's not as accomplished. I find criticism like that just so bizarre because... How do you know how different? What do you mean? What does that mean? Because this is what it is. There's not like two versions, and you're picking your favourite. This is the only version that exists. So I don't understand this sort of criticism. And I also think when you look at like how it's shot, the creative choices around like the bird creature, you know, and all them things, and the way that like the tension builds, and you know the direction of particularly the character playing Tinja, who was young, you know, she's like 12, 13, and she gives this really masterful performance, you know, and is an absolutely wonderful actor, but obviously the director has got to encourage that performance. So I think I'll be blunt, I think that's bullshit criticism from jealous people.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I agree, especially with your point of, you know, when people make comments like this, you know, you think, well, what do you have to compare it to? There isn't, as if there are two versions of the film. And actually, you know, given, you know, if you listen to the director's, you know, some interviews that she's given, I feel like she's actually very much realized her vision for the film.
Yeah.
So yeah, fuck off, everyone.
Yeah,
This is her vision.
Yeah. Where's your film? Where's your film that you've made? Where's your first feature? Shove it.
Go off and make your own film.
Yeah. Don't be criticising. Shove it.
So what really got me actually is that look of the creature, and I mean, obviously we did say at the start there's going to be a spoilerific from the start, so there's no point hiding anything about it, and it's so slimy, right? Like the first time we see that creature on screen, it's like, oh my god, like it really, just the look of it really got me. But again, in that interview, so Hannah explained she worked with 2 Finnish concept artists, and she kind of told them, what she wanted, and basically what she wanted the creature to represent was the complete opposite of what the mother wants her daughter to be. So this perfect gymnast and proper little girl. So the creature is deformed, it's slimy, it's disgusting, and in fact, the director describes it as it's kind of a smelly teenager. It's raging to its parent, but still wants to be loved. And I was like, that's perfect, because that's exactly the idea that you get seeing that creature. What do you think about that?
I totally agree, actually. I think the fact that, again, another thing I really love about it, and I know I've talked about this before and will till I'm blue in face, is that I really love practical effects and, the use of practical effects and, puppets. Like the first sort of iteration apparently was like a puppet, and then after that they used actors but with prosthetics, and it's so wonderfully done and visually rich. Like you say, you can see that it's slimy and gross, but like the texture, like the feathers, because it does just look like a bird. We've all seen like birds come out of eggs, haven't we, and stuff, and it does look like that. But yeah, it makes me think about the director of like the lure saying about the slime, slimy mermaids.
Yes.
And like linking young women and slime, this seems to be a very common theme.
A common thing, yeah. But something that we can relate to as well.
Yeah, but it is a very grotesque like creature, but still wants to be loved. And, Tinja loves it, does care for it and seems to feel very deeply for it. And I know we'll sort of get into it a little bit more. I've got some thoughts about the symbolism of that relationship. You'll be surprised to hear. But yeah, I mean, I think to do such a visually like arresting, gross thing from the off and be like, look at this horrible thing, like confronting the viewer with it. And then what do you think? How do you feel about this thing? Because it's like, I suppose it looks gross. Sorry, Ali, we should say. Ali looks gross. But also is like mewling and like pathetic and looks vulnerable and it's sort of...
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit like that uncanny valley sort of feeling, because it's like this thing that looks a little bit like what you've seen before, but is so totally alien. And so you have this, or I did anyway, this sort of weird reaction to it. But then you quickly sort of become quite concerned about it and think, oh God, I hope no one finds it. I hope that,
exactly.
So it's really well done. Again, suck it, nerds who criticised it.
Yeah.
You try making people
taking
love,
offence to this.
You try making people fall in love with a gross, oily bird. Yeah,
exactly, and that's exactly what happens there. I think what the initial response to seeing the creature is like, oh my God, it's so disgusting, and it does all sorts of disgusting things. But actually, you do care for it, and it's that vulnerability that you talked about, and I think that definitely couldn't have been achieved by VFX. So it very much had to be an animatronics, a puppet, and I think I'm thinking in terms even of the production for the actors to be able to to be on on set with this creature must have been very it must have been a very arresting experience. So I think that's that's fantastic that they've managed to do that. And in fact, the person who did the puppet is the designer Gustav Hogan, who has his studio Biomimic in London, and is behind some of the most incredible animatronics work in film. If you think the Star Wars franchise, Jurassic World, Prometheus, Tim Burton's movies, etc., you name it, he's done it. So it's very much him who's responsible for the look and feel of that extraordinary bird creature.
Yeah.
So this alone, if you haven't watched the film by now at this point of the podcast, you should stop it and go and watch it.
Yeah, what you doing? We'll watch it. But shall we talk about the rather, I suppose, culturally relevant issue of the absolute psychosis of the mommy blogger? The absolute inherent madness of the lifestyle blogger.
Absolutely. influencer mum, who needs them? Or in fact, one shout out to my friend Penny, who introduced me to this term. She I think the mum in Hatching is very much an almond mum.
Oh.
So I don't know if you've come across this before. And so it's a term that I'm sure you can guess is rooted in diet culture, and is gone viral thanks to some resurfaced clips of I think early seasons of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, and it refers to Yolanda Hadid, where she's talking to her then teenage, now supermodel daughter Gigi. In one of the clips, Gigi complains that she's feeling weak because she hasn't eaten any food all day, and her mum responds with diet culture inspired advice. She says, "Have a couple of almonds and chew them really well." And honestly, that's not even the most shocking comment that she makes, or toxic advice that she gives her daughter. But that's kind of beside the point. And I think that term's almond mum really encapsulates what we're dealing with here with the mother, who is in fact doesn't even have a name. She's mother, right?
She's
in the
mother,
film.
yeah.
She doesn't. Yeah, she's just mother.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is, she's very, she's curated. God, I hate the word that people just say about everything. I saw a thing the other day about curating an earring stack. Well, like, it's just wearing earrings. This is absolutely insane. This word is just being...
Yeah, it's a term that's gone out of hand, right? Everybody is trying to curate their life, and you're like, isn't curating just for art and exhibition? Let's leave it
bizarre.
there.
But she's very carefully sort of manipulating and curating this picture of a perfect life, and she and I always think it's not just me that thinks it, but there's a massive like sinister undertone to this as well, that she is putting her young children, and we assume she's been doing it for quite a while because kids are very used to filming them doing things on internet, and it's like you putting your children out there onto the internet, which is filled with not the most wholesome of people. And I know there's been a lot of backlash since this sort of influencer thing has grown in popularity with Instagram about kids not being able to consent. And I did think about that a lot when watching it, actually, that, like Tinja she's trying to be a gymnast. Does she really want to be a gymnast? We're never really sure, but her mum wants her to be a gymnast, but only if she's the best gymnast. Otherwise, there's like no point in doing it.
No point doing it, yeah.
But she's like filming her in practices, and she's making a cartwheel, and it's really perverse. I think I do think that is really expertly sort of emphasised without it being made explicit. But there is a perversity in their relationship that I think is partly to do with this influencer sort of role. But I think also it's partly to do with there's no boundaries. Like a mum just talks to her about things and treats her like she's a friend, and she talks to. I mean, she's a horrible character. There's no, there's no way around it.
Yeah, it's all for that. It's that facade of the family's picture perfect image, and I think that's quite well reflected with the. The image of the egg growing, and really, the mum's self-esteem in the end is as fragile of that eggshell, right? So she's putting on that front, but actually, as as the slightest crack, you can see appearing all these issues with the way she lives her life, the way she thinks of others, and that everything she's projecting onto Tinja is everything that she can't be herself.
Absolutely, and I think that idea about projection is central, like, in this film, and I think that she is sort of she is projecting that idea, what she wasn't. I mean, I've said this before. I said this on something else. I can't remember what it were I was talking about, but there's that saying that, like, mothers represent all you might come to be, and for mothers, daughters represent all that you'll never be, and that tension in that relationship. And so she seems to be very much like pushing Tinja towards this, this goal, very difficult goal, to be, an Olympic gymnast. It's not, it's not like a small, readily achievable thing. But, like, as you've said, like, projecting onto her these hopes and these dreams and not giving her the space to find her own way. So there's a scene towards the end of the film where Tinja's mother's become aware of Ali's existence, and mother and daughter set off to hunt Ali down and to sort of do away with her. And Tinja says in this really like heartbreaking way, she's like, "But I hatched it. You know, it's like I birthed this. This is my child," and you see that throughout, in that she wants to protect Ali in this way that she has never been protected, and I think in that way then Ali becomes this vehicle for Tinja's trauma, much like Tinja is a vehicle for her mum's trauma. And I think it makes a really interesting sort of point about that idea about intergenerational trauma and about how your parents pass their shit on to you, and then if you don't break that cycle, you pass that shit on again, and that's just sort of what happens. But yeah, so I do think that relationship is painted as a very unhealthy one. And as you've said, and there's sort of a relationship between Tinja's mum and I think he's called Tero. So she's having an affair with this guy, and when he rejects her, as you've said, that's when you see this splintering of this facade. And she and she immediately turns to just rage. This rage comes out of her, and you can see how like tightly wound she is. And I think throughout you see how they're all so tight, like just so unhappy. Everybody's unhappy. And I mean, Dad's just a spineless creep. Probably not a creep.
They're just all a receptacle for her. They're just containing. All the family unit actually is that eggshell around. Around the mum, right?
Yeah.
They're all containing her frustration and her rage. And as you say, once she gets rejected, once she doesn't get what she wants, then that's when it all fractures and it's just that rage is coming out, and that very much conditional love at work is on full display, and it's really heartbreaking. And you were just talking about the dad, and he's just such a spineless. It's just such a worm.
He's a worm. That's what he is. He's a worm.
Worm for the bird.
He is a worm for the bird. He is. And, he's desperately trying to keep her happy, even when she's, having affairs and she's abusing the children, and he's not getting involved. He's very careful to not be involved. And, the brother's jealous because he don't get the same attention, and Tinja is desperately trying to keep this relationship, just to keep her happy, and it reminds me in a way like Mommy Dearest, that sort of rigidity and the impossibly high standards, and that how that translates into these like outbursts of rage, and how what would that feel like? I mean, it is I think what's interesting about it as well is it presents child abuse, which it is. I mean, in a very middle class way, and I do think them representations are important, because what we normally see is it's very class. People are very quick to demonise working class parents. But getting your daughter to practice until her hands bleed because she weren't perfect is abuse, the same way as if you'd slapped her. It's exactly the same, and I think that element of it is important, to be showing that this is the consequence of this like influencer life. This idea that everything's got to be perfect, and if it's not perfect, you'll be punished. I went deep there, didn't I? Oh.
No, but that's a really interesting point. Actually, as you were saying it, I was wondering if people would be able to tease that out of the themes of the film. I'm not saying people wouldn't be able to pick out on the child abuse aspect of the film, but more that that classist aspect really of that depiction of child abuse, and of people confusing ambition for your children with with abuse and with trauma. And I mean, actually, the ending of the film really suggests that, in the end, Tinja becomes, all rage and trauma rather than, is that complete loss of innocence and who the person she could have developed to be in a nurturing, loving environment versus, that ultra ambitious, conditional love, pushing, the attitude of her mother. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point to make that you've made there.
Oh, thank you. And I'll always bring it back to class whenever I can. Shoehorn it in. Eat the rich.
Eat the rich. Class and folklore. This is what we are about. And actually, talking about folklore, I thought, should we talk about the symbolism of the, because, the bird creature is the main event in the film, but actually birds are kind of happening, or they are birds imagery all over the film basically. So I was wondering what you made of that, what you can tell us about it.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I think we know that birds have got a very long sort of symbolism in folklore, and things like it being a crow that flies into the house. And when it happened, actually, I was watching it with my partner, and I went, "Oh, Harbinger of Doom, that," and he went, "Oh God, here we go." Like, like if a crow flew in our house, we'd have to move, that sort of thing. But I was like, "Oh, that's bad news." And then obviously, the crow could have survived, but Mommy Dearest just breaks its neck. Which, I mean, who would kill a crow? I mean, you've obviously got no sense if you're that, But it's interesting because crows and sort of ravens and things are seen as like like messengers quite often, or like carried spirits to the other side. If anyone's ever seen the absolutely incredible film The Crow, which obviously
The Crow,
why not? If not, that's
if not exactly why not? What have you been doing with your life?
What were you doing with your teenage years?
Just for a little bit of eye candy. Come on.
If you didn't spend your teenage years watching Eric Draven in leather pants jumping off roofs, what were you doing?
Awakening.
But I mean, obviously, the crow is seen as the sort of conduit to transport spirits from one side to the other, and I think that ties in really well with the old sort of the doppelganger, which we've not really touched on. But that is the sort of culmination of the bird creature, is that it slowly but surely starts to shed, its feathers and look more human, and its beak, and eventually turns into Tinja. And I think that doppelganger is so evocative, actually. And I know we've sort of got other films about it because I'm obsessed with doppelgangers. But I did do a little bit of a folklore dive, shock horror once again.
Let's hear it.
Well, it's quite interesting because there's even sort of discussion about what doppelganger means. I mean, I've got it as it means like double walker, but there's other in German, which is the sort of origin of the word, but there's other interpretations of it. But it's essentially a doppelganger is a biologically unrelated double of a person, so it's not like an identical twin. It's someone who a person who is totally unrelated to that individual, and absolutely terrifying as a concept, I think. And they're again, much like sort of crows and ravens, they're seen as this sort of harbinger of bad luck, or referred to as like an evil twin, the dark half, that sort of thing. And they're often portrayed as a paranormal phenomenon. But it is a relatively recent term. Well, I say relatively. It's so funny when you talk about like history. I saw it described as a relatively recent term because in 1787 they weren't using it. I was like, what? What? All right.
It's so relative when it comes to history,
it's
as you say.
All relative. But, it's like relatively recent. So in 1787, the Provincial Glossary, written by Francis Gross, referred instead to a fetch, which is defined as the apparition of a living person, which I thought was interesting. And you do see this sort of duality, oh, no pun intended, between the idea of a doppelganger as being like a spirit of a person and being quite paranormal in that way, or it being like a totally separate entity altogether. But the idea of alter egos or like double spirits has been really widely represented in folklore, myths, and even religious concepts and traditions in cultures throughout, the world and throughout history. So I've got a couple of examples. So in ancient Egyptian mythology, they were referred to as a ka or a ba. There's two ways to pronounce it, but I'll stick to ka, I think. And it's a spirit double. So it's someone who has the same memories and feelings as the person to whom that counterpart belongs. So it's like the same person, but sort of like copied, I suppose, copy-pasted. But there's also a Hopi legend from America that refers to dualistic twins. So they would be like the children of the sun and the children of the water. And also this duality of the upper world and the underworld. So anything that's happening in the upper world is also happening in the underworld. And this may or may not, slight teaser linked to one of my film recommendations. But this idea that what is happening above is also happening below. In terms of famous encounters with doppelgangers, apparently Abraham Lincoln saw his double in a mirror, which seems doubly bad luck to me. To see your own doppelganger in a mirror.
I'm really fucking stupid.
I mean, it could only be made worse if his doppelganger also had a crow on his shoulder. But he saw his own double, but said that it was like much paler. And his wife said it were a bad omen that he wouldn't live through. He'd lived through his first term in office, but not his second. And I believe that were right because obviously we know he was assassinated. So in that respect, the doppelganger was a bad omen. And also Percy Shelley, he saw his own doppelganger. And again, I mean, he had a sort of a nasty end. He drowned, so perhaps there's something to this idea.
So not a great omen usually.
Yeah, to see your own doppelganger. But it's interesting because it also links, and I think there's an interesting link in this film in particular with the idea of like changelings, who obviously are babies left by the fae in place who take a human child and leave one of their own, and we see that in any culture that has concepts of fairies and fairy folk and fae. And I think, with the ending of the film, there is that idea that Ali is a bit of a changeling for Tinja in a way. Mm-hmm. But there is a modern phenomenon called twin strangers. So this tends to be how people refer to doppelgangers now when they're not trying to portray this sort of very gothic, negative bad omen. And so this is where people have found their own doppelgangers, like on social media and things like that. And you can actually see people's stories at twinstrangers.net. So you see all these videos of people who've met their doppelganger who lives in like a totally different country and they're totally unrelated. But it is explored a bit as a sort of phenomenon because apparently these people do share like really similar genetic information, but they're not like directly related. So it's a really weird phenomenon.
It is.
Yeah, so that
made a note of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean, that was my little
doppelganger Clelia, I'm coming for you.
Yeah. Well, you can actually on this, you can actually put your picture in, and it'll search through social media and find your doppelgangers.
Oh, that's creepy.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know if there's somebody out there who looks like me. It would really freak me out. So, but people can if they want. Twinstrangers.net. If it's a scam website,
we're not judging. We're just putting the information out there.
I don't know if it's a scam website. Don't put your credit card in. I'm just just passing on.
Just a messenger here.
But yeah, and I think that doppelganger element in this film is so interesting. I mean, as we've said about, Ali being this sort of vehicle for Tinja's trauma, but I think then what you see, these relationships are all so like sort of symbiotic in a way, and like now Ali becomes this embodiment of all of Tinja's rage. She is like the all this stuff that she's suppressed, and she's squashed down all these negative feelings, and every time she's wanted to tell her mum to fuck off, I don't want to be on your stupid channel, or I don't want to do gymnastics.
Yeah, it's like a physical representation of of her trauma and frustration and anger, and the way that it can manifest physically in I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm talking about my own experience, but I know that all sorts of weird things happen to my body when I, when I don't, when I'm really frustrated or angry for a long period of time. If you've been in a if you've been in a toxic relationship or something, you'll have noticed some like weird stuff happening to your body. And in this case, I feel like it's really, that external representation of this. So it's kind of in a beautiful, beautiful, horrible way.
It is, and I think it's interesting because it does a similar thing to what, I suppose what we talked about a bit in like Ginger Snaps, in how all her frustration comes out, but it's under her control, whereas this feels very much like all that feeling that she's squashed and she's like, it's like seeping out, she can't stop it, and then it's become physical but independent from her. So she, we see through the film that they are very, they're obviously like physically linked, and we see that when Ali is going to be violent, that Tinja sort of has seizures, and it's a bit like this parasitic twin sort of dynamic.
Yeah, I also find it really touching that she calls her Ali, because of it's linked to that lullaby, right, that her mom and her sing at some point in the film, and he refers to a baby bird being abandoned, or a child being abandoned, rather.
Yeah.
So again, like that, that rounds up the whole theme really, really well, of what it represents for her, and in terms of in terms, that the connection you were making with Ginger Snaps, I think is really interesting. But obviously in this film, we very much talk about a pre-pubescent girl. So, you just, at an age where you literally, all those changes are happening, but you genuinely have no idea how to deal with, you don't know what those emotions are, where to put them and what to do with them. So I think that was a very clever way from the screenwriter and the director to find the perfect imagery for this.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think when you see, obviously what Ali's doing, the sort of, it does seem to be, what's interesting about it is it's this like externalization of all rage, but it's directed at all the time the wrong people. Like, it never turns on a mum, and I think for the audience that probably would have been much more satisfying if she'd turned on a mum. But it's the very, like, I think it links again to that idea about her being prepubescent, and it's very childlike. So she's jealous, so she's going to get rid of that jealous, the thing.
Yeah, and exactly. And you said it's not turning against her mum. Instead, it's turning against the people that could be a threat, that could be standing between her mum and her, right? So like the neighbor who's better than her at gymnastic, the baby that might that threatened to take her place in the family unit, and it's so tragic and it's so sad. Yeah, but it's also a perfect. A perfect representation of of these toxic relationships.
I think what's interesting about it as well is that, as you've said, that she it's like she's trying to get rid of all the competition, and then if she can be perfect, then she'll have all the mum's love. And Ali's like trying to give that to her, but I do think that idea that when she's like dreaming, she can see, or even when she's not dreaming, as film progresses, as Ali sort of grows stronger and more autonomous, she sees what she's going to do. So they have got that link, and she can see like when she's going to hurt that baby. And I was watching that like, oh God, no, it can't go this far. Surely not. But so it's like Ali's trying to give her what she wants. And again, that dynamic being repeated. So Ali's trying to get rid of all these people that are making Tinja feel jealous or feel threatened, and trying to give her what she thinks she wants, but it's not what she actually wants her to do. And that as she's trying to sort of show her that that's not right, you can see that sort of push-pull, like trying to, like, you can't be just going around, like clobbering people in woods and cutting babies up with axes. Like, it's not. But to what goal? I think that's the thing. It is that very childlike idea of there's no end point. Like, she's just going along and doing it. Like, there's no plan of, oh, well, what am I going to do with this bird under my bed?
No, exactly. But she's willing to nurture that weird bird that's slowly turning into her.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us actually really nicely to that, one of the central horror of the film is, obviously the horror of coming of age. And, just talked about it, but, Tinja, battling her own demons of adolescence that Ali kind of represents. And I was just kind of wondering how you thought the film navigated this, even in terms of the body horror elements of the film. We talked about the slimy creature and how we've seen that in other films that we've talked about, and that's very much linked to to female growing bodies and sexuality. And I was wondering what you thought of the way it was represented in this film.
I think it's...
especially... Sorry.
No, go on.
That sounds terrible. I'm like, I'll let you speak. No, hang on, let me. I'm just thinking it particularly... Sorry, I was just asking this because particularly the scene that I had in mind was that when her father comes in her bedroom and notices the blood stain on her sheets, and, the way that he reacts is just so, again, in terms of that repression and frustration that we see throughout the film. I think that kind of, that little moment encapsulates perfectly all the reasons, that we think that Tinja has every right to birth that terrifying creature.
Well, yeah, and the thing that I thought with that when I was watching it is when he's like, oh, you'll be a woman or whatever. I thought, this is how you know this is a man who's had no, interaction really with women's bodies, because why would it be on top of bedsheet? Why would it be up there if that's what had happened, you fool? Where do you think women bleed from on the periods, out of their eyebrows? Where do you think it's coming from? It's ridiculous. So yeah, I did think this is a man who has not prepared himself to be the parent of a teenage girl. That's what we've got here. And yeah, I think, as Ali sort of represents, I think I do agree with everything you've said about her representing this change, but I also think that she represents a fear of that again, which I suppose is linked to the idea about growing and developing, and it's the fear of being bad, quote unquote. It's the fear of rage. It's the fear of these negative emotions and these negative feelings, and a fear of violence, of taking what you want, of not taking shit.
Well, it doesn't fit with the image of femininity that her mother is imposing on her. So that's probably why she's so afraid of it, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And Ali's, she's grubbing about in muck, and she's jumping through windows, and she's very physical, and physically very, as we've said, slimy at first, and then less slimy but covered in blood a lot, and then there's probably a metaphor there about that.
Been there.
Yeah, but it's a very hyper feminine world that she's been conditioned in, and her mum is always perfectly put together, and that's part of the brand, because they're a brand as a family, which again is so toxic and such a nightmare. But you do keep coming back again and again in this film to that idea about blood, and you can only really think about it, not only think about it in that way, but it makes sense when you think about how old she is and what's going on in her life, for it to be this metaphor for, menstruation and change and becoming an adult and stuff. And I think about when she's that fairy tale aspect I thought were really vivid, when her mum's made a practice and her hand's bleeding, and then she comes back and she's stroking egg, and her blood gets on shell, and it's very Snow White, dripping in snow into it, and very that image of the blood sort of, it's very evocative, I think. I mean, I always think blood, particularly women, menstrual blood, it's always very evocative in horror. More menstrual blood, everybody. That's what we need. Buckets of it. But yeah, and I did think that, that very, even when, Ali eats vomit, it is this, and obviously that's a very bird thing to do. I mean, that's very on brand for a bird to be eating puke. But it's very, the fact that she feeds her from her own body is...
I'm sorry, I want that on a t-shirt. Very on brand for a bird to eat puke.
Keep your eyes peeled, folks. That might be next merch.
That might be the next one, yeah.
But, you know, the fact that she sort of feeds her from her own body like a mother would, like a mother bird, like she would, you know, and I think that is interesting. It's like playing with a doll almost, but it's a doll that's, you know, capable of swinging an axe. And I do think that she, especially when you sort of see, I suppose we'll get to the end, because I think it's a very interesting ending, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are on it. But yeah, I do think you can read Ali really easily as a metaphor for everything she fears, which is becoming angry, smelly teen, and a mum not accepting her. I mean, how would a mum react if she got acne, or, you know, she were in a bad mood because she were on a period, or, you know, there's no space in this life that they've built, that a mother's built, for anything like that.
Yeah, I think the ending was a very a clever and fun little twist on the ugly duckling story, you know, that is supposed to, you know, turn into that beautiful swan, but in the end she just, you know, all is left of her are those, you know, those angry, slimy and bloody part.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just, you know, in terms of, you know, the way they ends, it was surprising, because I genuinely thought it was gonna, you know, resolve in a completely the opposite way, you know, kind of like we were gonna go back to the status quo, almost. So yeah, I did find it really powerful.
No, I did as well, and I didn't think it were gonna end like that, because it's very unfair, really. To Tinja, because she she is the sacrifice. But I suppose in that way it is very true to rest at film, because she has been a sacrifice for everything she does is a sacrifice for a mum.
Exactly. Sacrificial lamb. And this is very much, I mean, it's also very true of what happens in toxic relationship, right? You just abandon an entire side of you, and, you know, that innocent, you know, and naive side, I suppose. And that's, as you said, that's really unfair, and that's really sad, especially in a child.
It is, but I think she is, again, she's playing that role that women are conditioned to, and it shows how early that conditioning starts, which is to sacrifice, to put everybody else first, to you know, put yourself in harm's way if needs be. And, you know, again, she's like caught between a mother and a self, really. The self that a mother will not accept, but that she can't see destroyed, like she's been sort of destroyed, you know, her self-esteem's been destroyed, and she can't see that happen to Ali. And I think that's, you know, very symbolic, and I think it's very sad. And the fact that a mum is like determined to kill this horrible creature that looks like a daughter, but her hair's falling out in clumps, and she's, you know, and even when, you know, Tinja's saying like don't, because obviously they're linked, so it's harming her for Ali to be harmed. Like, she don't listen, and again that just reiterates what she's like all the way through the film. She don't listen, she don't hear, she don't see.
No.
And that is the consequence of it. And I think if you read it in that way, as like the death of, you could read it, I suppose, as it's the death of the child, as you've said, sort of the death of innocence. But I think as well, I read it as that idea about the death of, what word am I looking for? I read it as like the death of being acceptable, the death of being passive, the death of, you know, like putting up with mummy's shit, really, because I don't get the vibe that Ali's gonna just suddenly put up with all her mum's, you know, crap. I don't think that,
she's
again,
not part of the aesthetic.
Yeah, you know, like you said, the status quo, I don't think will return. But it's a shame. I mean, I suppose I'm getting probably too deep now and I'm reading too deep into it, but you can even sort of see it as that idea that is a sad idea when you are trying to come out of something like toxic, which is that you can't keep all the parts of yourself if you want to move forward. You've got to, part of you has got to die to be free of what you've been through.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I might be reading too much into this and people might be like, what is she talking about?
Well, frankly, that if they think that, just like the critics, they can just do one, okay?
Yeah, don't listen then. Fuck off.
No, we don't mean that.
Don't listen. Listen, please. Like and subscribe. But yeah, I do think that, and I think it is really symbolic as an ending and very sad. But again, it's like that. Like Tinja's blood goes into Ali's mouth, and then it's like the final stage of Ali's transformation. It's like the final, I suppose, the final absorption of Tinja. It's like the final phase of that, and then she's what's left, and she's angry, and she's, you know, her hair's falling out, and she's really fucking pissed off. And you're like, good, this is what you deserve. But I did think...
It's beautiful, yeah.
It is, but I did think it was interesting because her mum sort of right at the end, she like sort of smiles a bit. I thought, and I was like, what's that? That I thought were interesting because I thought, well, what's to smile about? She might rip your head off your neck. I mean, you don't know which way this is going to go. But...
I don't know. Yeah, I did wonder about this as well. The little, the slight smile that she has. Is it that, that she's successfully... managed to, I don't know, kill the child. I don't know if that was her goal all along, but it's really, or is she actually, is it, is she mirroring what, what Tinja has become? It's really, if you read it in that doppelganger sense, I just, wonder if sorry, the bird creature, I keep forgetting the name, has kind of become, a direct reflection of what the mum is, really, so...
Well, because she's ruthless, so maybe she thinks having a ruthless child will be better in long run, because Tinja is very sensitive.
Is that her image, yeah?
Yeah. She's very sensitive and although she's like very malleable, she is a very sensitive child. So maybe she thinks, oh, well, this one's not as sensitive and pretty ruthless. And maybe that means we can get where we need to get much quicker when I'm not having to think about, Tinja's feelings sort of thing. That might be it.
Exactly. Together we can conquer the world.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it is such a complex film and it does have the sort of symbolism of a fairy tale. It is very symbolic and I really like that about it. I think that really adds...
It's a great subversion of the fairy tale. The end, the whole story and the ending, I think, is a perfect, perfect subversion of our expectations as an audience as well.
Yeah,
For that reason, 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10, absolutely, definitely one that's worth watching. And I didn't see that it necessarily got a massive release. I want to say here, I don't remember seeing.
I don't think it did.
No.
Yeah, certainly.
And it's one of them that could really easily go sort of under radar, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to do it.
So hopefully, no, exactly. Like I said, it's really glad you brought this one up to my attention, and I really hope that people go and watch it because it's really, really worth it, and definitely hope that we'll see more of that director as well because visually, I think she's such an interesting director. So we need
absolutely.
More of that.
I mean, absolutely fantastic style, and vision, and I would love to see more. I'd love to see what she did next. I think it'd be incredible. But thinking of films and other things, what other recommendation? Seamless. That was seamless. Clelia seamlessly went into that. Then razor sharp.
On my list of recommendation, I went from the obvious to maybe not so obvious, but it definitely made me think of it. So in terms of the obvious one, The Hole in the Ground from 2019 by Lee Cronin, immediately the film. In terms of doppelganger aspect and changeling aspect, it really made me, I thought it was very reminiscent of it. The Fly, in terms of the body horror, was...
Yes.
Immediately thought, as soon as I saw the slimy birdie creature, I was kind of like, oh, you know what? The Fly deserves a rewatch.
Yes,
I think. And weirdly enough, I rewatched. I'm gonna need to find the director's name right now, but May from 2002, directed by. Give me a second. Directed by Lucky McKee.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen that one.
I was,
which is
obsessed with May. Absolutely obsessed. Loved it. And I've not seen it in years since I was a teenager, so I am definitely...
Go and rewatch it, is it? Yeah, I thought it was the perfect... Actually, to be fair, I think it was the perfect companion piece to Pearl, which we talked about last time. But in terms of, the isolation and not fitting in and, trying to be what everybody else expects you to be. And obviously then, if you can't find a friend, make one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. I thought that was quite good. What about you? What's on your list?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned The Fly, actually, because I saw that recently at cinema and it were amazing. Really good. And I'm very pleased to see we didn't have any crossover. I thought we might get some crossover here for Doppelgangers. Amazing. So I had, when I said earlier about, the link between the underworld and the upper world, so I had Us from Jordan Peele, which obviously... is very much that idea about, the tethered, and it's brilliant. If people aren't seen it, I mean, it's it's absolutely worth a watch, absolutely fantastic, and really plays with that idea about the sort of mirror, the dark and the light half of, but then it subverts that in a really interesting way. I also had Possession, obviously any excuse to get possession on this podcast. And if you've not seen it, definitely do. And again, I mean, for like icky, sticky body horror, can't do much better.
Perfect, yeah.
than Possession. And then the last one I had were Black Swan, which I've not seen for a few years, but I remember seeing it when it came out, and I really, really liked it. And I mean,
that's a great one. I'm mad I didn't think about that. That's a great one, of course. Yeah.
But I really love.
Anyone?
But that feeds in quite well with the hatching. I mean, it'd be a pretty good double bill, I suppose. This idea about like obsession and desire to be the best, and like pushing yourself to the limit,
and toxic mummy as well.
Yeah. So it would be an excellent double bill, I think. But yes, do we have anything else? Any final thoughts, do you think, on the hatching, other than go out and watch it immediately?
Go and watch it immediately, I would say, would probably be my final thought for this one, because because he had such a small theatrical release, and if you've missed it when he came out, and you haven't even heard of it, then like I said, Meg said at the beginning, is available on the BFI player, and so just run and watch it now. Definitely worth a watch.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for listening to Monstrous Flesh. Please join us next time for more discussion about women in horror. You can find out more about us via our website, www.monstrousflesh.co.uk, where you can find out more about our research for each episode, buy our wonderful merch, and see our upcoming events. We would love to hear from you, either via our email or social media channels. And also, please rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts, and help us spread our spooky words by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. And until next time, creep it weird, everyone.